He had judged thousands before, but this performance stopped him cold. The Got Talent stage buzzed with electric energy. Spotlights swept across the darkened auditorium in rhythmic waves of blue and gold, casting dancing shadows over 2,000 expectant faces. The familiar hum of anticipation filled the air, that unique cocktail of nervous excitement and boundless possibility that made this show a global phenomenon. Simon Cowell sat at the judges' table, his signature black button-down crisp under the studio lights. 23 years in the entertainment industry had taught him to spot genuine talent within seconds, to separate dreamers from doers with surgical precision. Tonight felt like any other, until she rolled onto the stage. The wheelchair appeared first, chrome wheels catching the lights as they turned slowly across the polished floor. Each rotation was deliberate, controlled. This wasn't someone being pushed, but someone who had mastered their own movement with hard-earned grace. Then came the woman, mid-30s, auburn hair in a simple ponytail, wearing a flowing purple dress. Her hands gripped the wheel rims with confidence that spoke of years of practice, calluses earned through countless hours of rebuilding herself. But it was her eyes that stopped conversations in the front rows, a fire that hadn't been extinguished. They held determination that comes only from losing everything and choosing to rebuild anyway. "What's your name?" asked the host. "Sarah Martinez," she replied, her voice steady. "I'm 34, from Phoenix, Arizona." Simon leaned forward, his practiced eye taking in every detail. Her posture was perfect, spine straight, shoulders back. This wasn't someone seeking pity, this was a performer. "And what will you be doing for us tonight?" Sarah's lips curved into a smile that illuminated the entire stage. "I'm going to dance." A murmur rippled through the audience. The cameras captured every expression, from raised eyebrows to encouraging nods. Simon's pen stopped moving. In his peripheral vision, he could see his fellow judges shifting, but his attention was locked on the woman center stage, on the quiet determination radiating from her. "Dancing has been my life since I was 5 years old," Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. 3 years ago, a drunk driver changed that. But he didn't stop it. No one can stop what lives in here. She placed her hand over her heart. The studio fell completely silent. Even the camera operators seemed to hold their breath. Simon's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd built his career on telling people hard truths, on separating realistic dreams from impossible fantasies. But something in Sarah's voice, something beyond hope or determination, made him pause. The music began. It started soft, a piano melody that seemed to rise from somewhere deep and ancient, each note hanging in the air like a promise. The opening bars were tentative, almost fragile, mirroring the vulnerability of the moment. Then strings joined in, wrapping around the melody like an embrace, building something beautiful from something broken. Sarah's hands moved to her wheels, and suddenly, impossibly, she was flying. The transformation was breathtaking. The wheelchair became an extension of her body, an instrument of expression as natural as breath. She spun in perfect circles, the purple fabric creating a kaleidoscope of color. Her arms moved in fluid arcs above her head, telling a story of loss and discovery, falling and rising. Each gesture was precise, each movement deliberate and beautiful, carrying the weight of someone who had fought for the right to move at all. But it was more than technique. It was poetry written in motion, pain transformed into art. Simon found himself gripping the edge of the table. He'd seen thousands of dance performances, some good, some great, some that changed lives, but this was something else entirely. This was resurrection. The music swelled, and Sarah's movements became more complex. She used the entire stage, weaving patterns, that seemed to defy the limitations of her chair. Her face was serene, lost in the music, as if she'd found a way to transcend the physical world entirely. In the judge's box, Simon's carefully constructed professional mask began to crack. His breathing had changed, fingers trembling against the table. He tried to maintain his analytical mindset, but something deeper was happening. This wasn't just about dancing. This was about defiance, the absolute refusal to accept that dreams had expiration dates. Simon had built his career on practical realities, on telling people when dreams were bigger than abilities. But watching Sarah, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the humbling recognition that sometimes reality was smaller than dreams. 23 years of judging, and he'd never seen anything like this. 23 years of measuring talent against marketability, potential against probability, and here was someone who had thrown out every rule he thought he knew about what was possible. Sarah's routine built to a crescendo. The music reached its peak, and she executed a series of spins that would have been impressive for any dancer, wheelchair or not. But in the final moment, she did something that broke every heart in the room. She reached toward the ceiling with both arms, her face tilted upward, eyes closed. The gesture was simple, almost childlike in its purity, but it contained multitudes. It was reach and yearning, loss and hope, the physical manifestation of a soul that refused to be earthbound. For one perfect, impossible second, she looked like she was flying, not despite the wheelchair, but because of everything it represented: the journey, the struggle, the choice to transform limitation into liberation. The purple fabric settled around her like wings folding, and in that moment of stillness, every person in that auditorium understood they had witnessed something beyond performance. They had seen the human spirit in its purest form, undefeated, undiminished, undeniably beautiful. The music ended. Silence. Not the uncomfortable silence of uncertainty, but the profound quiet that follows something sacred. 2,000 people held their breath, as if exhaling might somehow diminish what they'd just witnessed. Simon stared at Sarah, his mouth slightly open. His hands, which had applauded mechanically through countless performances, remained motionless on the table. Something was happening inside his chest, a tightness he couldn't name, couldn't categorize, couldn't file away in any of the neat professional compartments he'd built over the years. For a man who made his living with words, cutting words, precise words, words that could build careers or end dreams, language had abandoned him completely. He felt exposed, as if Sarah's performance had somehow stripped away not just her own limitations, but his defenses as well. The sophisticated machinery of judgment and critique that usually hummed along so efficiently had simply stopped. He started to speak, then stopped, started again. I don't. The words caught in his throat like foreign objects. Around him, he could sense the cameras capturing his confusion, his vulnerability, but for once in his career, he didn't care about the image he was projecting. All he could think about was the woman on the stage who had just redefined everything he thought he knew about possibility. The other judges looked at him with concern. Simon Cowell was never at a loss for words, never uncertain, never vulnerable. But Sarah wasn't finished. "You know what the hardest part was," she said, her voice carrying easily across the silent auditorium. "It wasn't learning to live without my legs. It wasn't the months of physical therapy, or the doctors telling me my dancing days were over." She paused, her eyes finding Simon's across the stage. The hardest part was believing them. Simon felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, crack, like ice beginning to thaw. "But then I realized something," Sarah continued. "Dancing isn't about your legs. It's not about your arms or your body or what other people think you can or can't do. Dancing is about your soul, and my soul never stopped moving." The audience erupted. 2,000 people rose to their feet as one, applauding not just the performance, but the woman, the spirit, who had just reminded them what human possibility looked like. But Simon remained seated, staring at Sarah with an expression none of his colleagues had ever seen before. His eyes were bright, almost glassy. His jaw worked soundlessly, as if he were trying to swallow something too large for his throat. "Simon," one of the other judges prompted gently. He blinked, seeming to remember where he was. Slowly, deliberately, he stood up. The action seemed to take enormous effort, as if he were lifting more than just his body weight. "Excuse me," he said quietly into his microphone. Then he stepped away from the judge's table. The audience watched in stunned silence as Simon Cowell, the man known for his sharp tongue and sharper suits, walked across the stage towards Sarah. His usual confident stride was replaced by something more hesitant, more human. He stopped in front of her wheelchair. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the space beside her. Sarah nodded, tears beginning to track down her cheeks. Simon knelt down beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. When he spoke, his voice was so quiet that the stage microphones barely picked it up. 30 years ago," he said, "I was a nobody, a failed musician with a dream too big for my talent and too stubborn to die. Everyone told me to quit, find something practical, something realistic." He paused, swallowing hard. "I almost listened to them. I almost believed that impossible meant impossible." Sarah reached out and took his hand. The gesture was captured by a dozen cameras, broadcast to millions of homes around the world. But in that moment, it felt private, sacred. "You just reminded me," Simon continued, his voice growing stronger, "that impossible is just another word for not yet." He stood up, still holding her hand, and turned to face the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice carrying clearly now through the auditorium, "you have just witnessed something extraordinary, not just a performance, but a lesson, a reminder that the human spirit doesn't recognize the limitations we try to place on it." The audience was on its feet again, but this time the applause was different. Deeper, more meaningful. Simon turned back to Sarah. "You're not just dancing, you're soaring, and you're taking all of us with you." He released her hand and stepped back, but before returning to the judge's table, he did something that would be replayed millions of times in the days to come. He bowed. A small, respectful nod that acknowledged not just her talent, but her courage. As Simon returned to his seat, the other judges could see that something fundamental had shifted. The man who sat down was the same one who had stood up, but different somehow, softer around the edges, more human. "Sarah," he said into his microphone, his voice steady again but somehow warmer than before. "In 23 years of judging talent, I've seen the good, the great, and the unforgettable. What you just did, what you just shared with us, that wasn't just unforgettable, that was transformational." He paused, looking directly at her. "You didn't just dance tonight. You reminded every person in this room, every person watching at home, that our limitations are often just illusions, that with enough heart, enough determination, enough soul, we can transcend anything." Sarah wiped away her tears, her smile brighter than all the stage lights combined. "The answer is yes," Simon continued. "Yes to the next round. Yes to your dream. Yes to showing the world what's possible when we refuse to accept what's impossible." The eruption that followed could probably be heard 3 blocks away, but through all the cheering and applause, through the confetti and the celebration, one moment stood out. Simon Cowell, standing at his place behind the judge's table, applauding not with his usual measured approval, but with genuine, unbridled admiration. Later, After the cameras had stopped rolling and the audience had filed out, Sarah remained on the stage. The lights had been dimmed to their working level, and the magical atmosphere of live television had given way to the more mundane reality of a TV studio. Simon approached her again, this time without fanfare or cameras. "I wanted to thank you," he said simply. "Thank me?" Sarah looked puzzled. "For what?" "For reminding me why I started doing this in the first place," he replied. "It wasn't about finding the perfect voice, or the perfect look, or the perfect story. It was about finding moments like this. Moments when someone shows us what human beings are really capable of." Sarah smiled. "We're capable of a lot more than most people think." "Yes," Simon agreed, his voice quiet but certain. "We are." As he walked away, Sarah called after him, "Simon?" He turned back. "Thank you for seeing me dance, instead of just seeing the chair." He nodded once, then disappeared into the shadows beyond the stage lights. That night, the footage would go viral within hours, shared millions of times, sparking conversations about disability, possibility, and human determination. But for Simon, the impact was quieter, more personal. For the first time in years, he remembered what it felt like to be surprised by human possibility. He had spent decades looking for stars. That night, he realized he'd found something better, a reminder that the most powerful performances come not from perfection, but from the courage to dance anyway. In the weeks that followed, Sarah would continue her journey on the show. She would face new challenges, devour new performances, touch new hearts. But that first night, the night she taught a room full of people, that dancing isn't about legs, it's about soul. That night would remain special. Because sometimes, in the middle of all the lights and cameras and spectacle, something real breaks through. Something that reminds us all that the greatest talent isn't technical perfection, it's the ability to transform pain into beauty, limitation into liberation, impossibility into art. That night, the world saw not the judge, but the heart behind the judgment. And in Sarah's courage to keep dancing, Simon found his own reason to keep believing in the extraordinary potential that lives inside ordinary moments. The stage lights faded to black, but the impact of that performance, of that connection between performer and judge, between possibility and reality, would continue to shine long after the cameras stopped rolling. Because some moments are bigger than television. Some stories transcend entertainment. And sometimes, when we least expect it, someone reminds us that the word impossible is just waiting for the right person to prove it wrong. Sarah Martinez had done more than dance that night. She had shown a room full of people, and millions more watching at home, what it looks like when the human spirit refuses to accept defeat. And Simon Cowell, the man who had made a career of measuring dreams against reality, had been reminded that sometimes the most realistic thing you can do is believe in the impossible. The curtain fell, but the lesson remained. We are all more capable than we know, stronger than we appear, and more resilient than we dare to believe. We just need to keep dancing.